So I'm Geeta Pensay, and I'm so excited to be in conversation with Malika Booker, who I'm sure many of you already know and are here as fans. But if you don't know Malika's work, just a few words before we meet the lady herself. Malika is a renowned writer, poet, theatre maker, and multidisciplinary artist. She had her first collection, which was Pepper Tree, and that was published by People Tree Press. Malika hosts and curates New Caribbean Voices, People Tree's Press's literary podcast, and she's currently a creative writing lecturer at Manchester Met University. And if you didn't know, she was also the inaugural poet in residence with the Royal Shakespeare Company. So Malika, welcome to Lyrical Lunchtime.
Hello, hi everyone. I'm so happy that you could come out on this hot day, that you're choosing to sit in your house and Zoom with us. This is great.
And Malika, you have done a Lyrical Lunchtime before, but this is obviously the first one online in the world of lockdown.
Yes.
And so, just so you know, we will be hearing some of Malika's work in this session, and there's some new material that I've never heard before. I'm sure you haven't either, so this is very exciting. But there will also be opportunity for questions towards the end of the session. So if something comes up while Malika is talking to me with us all together, do put the question in the chat box. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the chat function, but if you just write your question, and the Writing East Midlands team will be keeping a track of the questions, and we'll try and answer as many as we can later. So Malika, first question for me really, obviously the reason we're here, as we just said, online, is because of COVID-19 and lockdown, and whilst things are beginning to ease a little, I just wondered, as a writer in this period, what's it been like for you?
It's been like heavenly and a big weight, and there's been some grief, and I suppose everything that everyone's been going around. I think as a writer, you're prepared for situations like this because you get commissions or you're working on a project and you lock yourself away from your family and everybody to do the work and to read. And I got to like interact with my bookcase over COVID. I think, yeah, a lot of times it was just trying to kind of establish and keep a ritual of getting to the desk. And some days it was wonderful and it happened. So I'd set the time and everything. And some days I'd tune into the news and then just be like, it's over. It felt like a heavy weight. So ups and downs in terms of writing, but always fighting to keep that ritual at the desk. And so I've come to the stage a few weeks, 2 weeks ago, where I decided to just have 1 week. Each alternative week would be just like a media block out, just in order for me to be able to create and to be able to be in create a bubble, to be able to kind of just kind of move, which means I get the news retrospectively the next week. And I miss out on things like, you know, the Prime Minister has further reduced lockdown. I go, oh, really? When did that happen? And my friends go, where were you? And I think, in my little writing bubble. So it's been like that, just figuring it out. Excitingly, just really, a lot of my friends, we write online. So we've kind of, I have online groups where we put up prompts and we write together and fling stuff on, but we're understanding. People are like, I wasn't able to come on for a few weeks or for a few days, or this happened or that happened. And so it's been good because I suppose in those in my Facebook communities with my writing buddies who are all working towards collections, we can see that we're all having that same awkward stop and start journey in writing. So and then you feel like, oh, that's all right, you know.
Community and being able to connect online has been so important, hasn't it, to know that you're not on your own. Yeah. But also I do find it fascinating because there's been so much talk about these social bubbles, and it's like you created a writer bubbles with these kind of weeks off from the world and what was going on, and I know we're going to hear your work in a moment, and one of the pieces I think you've written during lockdown. So I just wondered, you know, when you have tuned back in, has that then influenced you in what you're writing?
Yeah. Definitely, because something has always inevitably happened. there's a piece that I did on the verb the other day that just came from the fact that I opened the blinds and looked out of the window, because I've only been out to shop, and only in the last 2 weeks have I started going out to go on a writing, on walk to walk, so I've just been in my house. So interestingly enough, to even sometimes opening the blind and just being like, wait a minute, every day at this particular time at 4 o'clock, this bird comes and it just, it just kind of soldiers the fence. Okay, I don't know what to write. Let's just start with the bird. Hi, bird. So even opening the blind has kind of influenced me, because I think as a writer, I'm still, and that's what we always fight for as writers, to be still. So we live life when we get this kind of avalanche of stuff, and then we just have to sit still to process it in order to write. And so I'm at my desk looking at the bird, processing in writing mode. Of course, that's going to, think something, or I get some news of something happening to a family member and stuff, and I'm writing. Of course, that's going to seep into the work, and also, obviously, all the unrest that's happening and the kind of revolution that's happening around the world. What's happening with the Caribbean community. So you tune in, and then it's like you tune in, and then, the week you tuned out, the police killed somebody, and the whole world is reacting. You're like, what happened? But it feels like I've always gotten that in slow motion. I get it. I'm just a step behind, which is interesting as well.
Well, I'm going to stop talking to you and ask you questions, even though I know everyone probably has so many things to ask you as well. But what we really want to do is hear some of your work. So over to you, Malika.
Right. So I'm going to press the timer because it's all new work. And for once, I'm usually really professional. Anybody I've taught who's done my performance courses, this is the one time that I haven't timed myself. I'm going to confess to any students out there. So I'm going to put my timer on, and so I'm reading new stuff. So this is Samson and his mother. I'm doing a PhD at Newcastle University, and I'm looking at what happens if you place the Caribbean region, the language, the people into the King James Bible, into the terrain of the King James Bible. What would happen? And so Samson, and so I've been reading the King James Bible inside out. And I was thinking, and Samson, and Samson and Delilah, his mother. So this is based on some of the things I found there. Erased. My name was bitter bush in my husband's mouth, so vile. He spat it out the day we hooked up and never slipped up, though once in a while he bellowed woman, wife, like he bellowed sheep and dog. Yet even his puppies had names. All of my life I was the braying donkey in his pen, the hog. How he would rest his palm on my head and pat it to show gratitude, like I was his pet. How I wanted caresses outside of our bed. When he learned I could not conceive, his mood was as coal in a black pitch lake, was as a camel trampling my already broken back. 2, answered prayers. And so Karen McCarthy Wolf invented this form that's, so these are all kind of sonnets, or meant to be sonnets. They're all 14 lines. But Karen McCarthy Wolf invented this form, and look, I've gone blank on the form. I've really gone blank on the form. But anyway, it's where you take a line of an original text and you respond to it. It's coupling. That's it. I have to think couplets, coupling. And it's in couplets. And so I decided to take a line of the Bible that refers to God addressing Samson's mother, and then respond. So this is a coupling and a sonnet. Answered prayers. Before thou shalt conceive and bear a son, that day the worms crawling in my belly stopped. Drink not wine, neither eat any unclean thing. And I bound my belly tight with rope, picked food like bird. For the child shall be a Nazarene to God from the womb. Yea, I danced on bare sand to the music of these words. Thou shalt conceive and bear a son, A little cloud briefly darkened. You were not a girl. The woman, barren his wife. My name was a speck of dust beneath these men's feet. And the woman shall bear a son and name him Samson. You, little gooseberry, were named before you ripened. And the woman, she, the wife, the woman, my name rattled the bars of their throat. I'm going to read one more from this selection. And this is Samson speaking back to his mother. So what I've done here is I've got Samson giving, I've done a coupling as well, but I've kind of messed about with Karen's form. So Samson gives a commentary on his mother, and then he talks about, and then he does her voice. You know, like when you're telling someone about something your mother said, like she said, she would always come in my room and say, clean up your room, son. So, you know, that's what I was trying to do. Samson's mother's nagging voice. There's a type of voice, a tone she had. I suffered to have you, my boy, suffered. The way she repeated things in different slants, long, long labor, breathing and panting, my body broke. She felt she owned me, she and God. Cut the umbilical cord, but they never cut our bond. Her words made me crawl into the wall corner. Shut up, be quiet, you're all brawn and stupid like rhyme. Mama's boy, they called me, mother's whip. Oh, so because you tower over me, you're not frightened? Her on a chair, hand tugging air, her cutting branch from a tree. My hands growing muscle from your hard ears. So I ran far, looked for women different than she. Look how my one baby son abandoned me. So yeah, so that's from the whole, that's some excerpts from that Samson sequence that I've been working on. And then I think I'm going to read in the last 5 minutes. Woo, I know this poem takes 5 minutes because I've timed it. So this poem, I was thinking about, I have this writing group on Facebook, and one of the prompts someone put up was to, I think that was me actually, because I'm doing the Bible stuff, was to kind of use a quote from the Bible to write a poem and use, and so I used this quote, a time to cast away stones and a time to gather stones together, a time to embrace or a time to refrain from embracing. And it was really interesting. For a few days, I was kind of making notes on stones and all these things that that could happen with stones towards writing this poem. And then I got news that my friend had been killed by her husband in one of the horrid domestic abuse cases that have been occurring during COVID. And all of a sudden, I couldn't respond in any other way but to write this poem. An alternative history of stones, take 1. Let us address the stones. What are you, stone, if not a small pebble that can be carried by hand? Therefore is the hand your servant, and you, stone, too, have your stories to tell. If a hand throws you, stone, who is in the wrong? The hand? The poet piles up stones to build a cathedral around a young Black woman so she will not burn, crack under the flames. Oh wait, let me read that again, sorry. The poet piles up stones to build a cathedral around a young Black woman so she will not burn. Stone, though she hears you only scorch, crumble, or crack on the flames, the poet builds this protection, but it is too late in this season of struggling lungs and hammering fists behind quarantine doors. Mothers warn daughters. Sometimes men will come like sheep, but are really goats. He came like a lamb and turned bull, turned beast, pummeling with hoofs, breathing fire. Stone, this is meant to be a poem about you, sir, but it is an unruly poem, a hard-headed poem, a wayward poem. Now the poet's heart is a stone. Yesterday, a picture of a young Black woman friend bounced into the poet's inbox. He killed her, headlined underneath. An alternative history of stones, part 2. Let us address the stones. And you, stone, too, have stories to tell. Back home in the woman's hometown village, young men gather stones in lush green bush, creating a circle to rest their pots over hot coals, cooking oil down. Yesterday, news flew across the net like a soiled dove with a broken wing. Fragile bruises bloomed. How long had he been seasoning the woman up to cook in our home like our house was an oven? Oh, let us address the stones, as stones too have their stories to tell. Sir, you tell the poet stone does not burn, it may crack or even be crushed into powder, but your answer is too late. Stone, you speak of David toppling Goliath with his slingshot. In the woman's village, boys went into the bush armed with slingshots to pelt birds, break their wings. Is this where the man learned to break his dove's wings? Remember, poet, you say, this is a poem about stones. Meanwhile, across Facebook, the woman's friends are stones rumbling, heavy. One post states, I spoke to her only last night. Death did not hint, it was a stone's throw to the crawling fire. In this poem, honey thickens in the woman's vein instead of water. Boiling epidermis shrinks, then splits open, and oil flows from the woman's body like boiling tears. Oh, give me more oil in my lamp, keep it burning. Her friends sing a chorus across Facebook, hymns to erase thoughts of oil in that oven burning, burning till daybreak. Sir, this is a poem about stones, yes, and you, stones, have your stories to look at the woman's village. A nun sits on a big stone. Look again at the woman's village. A nun sits on a big stone by the seashore under the fire of sunset, praying for the woman trapped between a rock and a hard marriage. Sir, stone is prayer, a servant of the mouth, like stones as servants of the palm. Where are the stones? Were the prayers at daybreak when the woman needed? Oh, let us address the stones, as stones have their own story to tell. The poet attempts to resurrect. The poem attempts to resuscitate. Oh, let us address the stones. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Malika. That was just, I think everyone will feel the same, understanding the context of the story and why you've written it, with your friend. How do you find the strength to write it, when you're dealing with your own grief as well, of the knowledge of what happened?
I think I wept the whole 4 days writing it, and it felt like, and I think that's when the poem started finding itself, because I realized, that we cannot go to a live funeral. We cannot bury her. So I think, well, we can bury her, but all of us can't go, So I think that's when the lines came. I'm building you a cathedral. So I think the poem is elegiac. It encompasses all the research about stones. But I think in a way it was the poet as well trying to have our own funeral in a way, I think. Yeah, it's a very, I think I felt privileged, and I felt blessed in a way that, unlike some of my friends, I had a way that I could lock the door for a few days and actually, because sometimes the poem is, when you're writing, you have all these glib things that you say to students. The poem is a way of working out things, of answering questions, of trying to capture something. And sometimes something happens in your creation process that makes you realize all of this is true. And I think all of that was true in the creation of that.
Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And there's so many comments in the chat at the moment of people saying how beautiful the poetry is, and how moving. And thank you for sharing it with us today. And the poems that you were reading before that poem as well. I wanted to ask you about those, because you mentioned that you've been studying the King James Bible, and it's clearly something, the story of Samson is one that you've picked to share with us. What was it about the Samson story, and how did you approach that when you were writing?
I think the it's kind of like an ex-racist poet project. You're responding to, one of the most iconic patriarchal texts in history, and you're looking for the cracks and you're looking for the questions. And I was reading the Bible and I thought, what's Samson's mother's name? I know Samson, I know Delilah. And then I went and I was like, oh, the father has a name. What's the mother's name? And then I thought, what would a Caribbean woman say if she didn't have a name? And I thought, she said, what, my name is an animal? What, I'm donkey, cat? And so then asking questions, I think, of the text, of the gaps, of the spaces, of what is as a woman as well, so much of the stories are, the women are just names or non-names, or just a kind of vehicle to push forward a message, or a vehicle to push in a child, and I think, and a lot of times, like I remember when I was young, I remember asking, I think my mother or some of my aunts, I said, I thought women made babies. And they were like, yeah, women made babies. And I said, but all this begatting, it's all men begatting men. And I think my relationship, my kind of questioning relationship with some aspects of the Bible began in Sunday school. I was always like, is begat the same as being pregnant? Like, so, but how do men begat? If so that's there in working with that text.
So it's a real kind of interrogation from actually a very young age. Your relationship with that text has always been a questioning of it.
Yeah.
And because drawing on what you were saying there, one of your kind of writer statements that I read was that you wrote, I write because my mother tells me I am the first generation of women to be able to tell our stories, and because I know there are women in the world who cannot speak. And just drawing on that, because you were saying that you're finding that female narrative or lack of a female narrative, how important has that been to your writing and currently what you're doing?
I think part of my DNA from a child was always questioning things. I always wondered about women's role in the world and in society. I think this project with the biblical text is not a kind of gender project in itself. As you see, Samson kind of speaks back and starts speaking to kind of corporal punishment and kind of the relationship with the mother. I think it's more about, I think it's the Bible is this kind of hard, fast rule. It's more about exploring the vulnerabilities. There are questions that I have, like, how did Abraham feel the night before? So Abraham was told by God, take your son and go and sacrifice him. After, the son didn't come into the world until his wife was 100 and something. They didn't think they were going to have children. It's the woman's heartbeat. And it was like, let's take her and go and go. So I'm just like, on the night before, even though he's going to do this thing, what is he thinking? How does faith work in this way? Or one of my things, and I get to kind of address things that really annoyed me when I was small, like, how dare they turn Lot's wife into a pillar of salt? Because for me, everywhere I went on the landscape in Guyana, and when I came up here, most of the statues are men. They're male statues that I could visibly see. And then in one of the most iconic texts, someone is turned into a statue, but it's a pillar of salt. So she's a pillar, but she's not a pillar. And it's and so I can explore things like that in the biblical text. I can explore all these things. I have the power as a writer to kind of explore these things and write my imagination into them and rewrite rewrite Lot's wife and make her have agency in our own story, you know, and make Moses reveal his vulnerability. I don't know if I can lead these people. I don't know if I can do these things you're asking me to do. But also put in a Caribbean context, it enables us to find a new way to talk about colonialism and plantocracy and slavery and gender relations and patriarchy. So it's kind of given me new tools, and it's enabled me to kind of, I think one of the things I was trying to ask myself is, what will it mean for me as a writer? What will it mean for the topics and themes if I'm looking at it? Pepper Seed was quite autobiographical about intergenerational women, about violence, about racism, and all kinds of things. But what does it mean if I'm coming straight from the Bible and just looking at the landscape that I write from, the Caribbean landscape? Will I still address the same themes? Will it still be kind of gender and all of this stuff? And obviously, yeah, I'm finding out. So I asked that question of myself as a writer, and you know, it seems that it is, but it's much more powerful work and much more nuanced and complicated than Pepper Seed, the poems in Pepper Seed, it seems.
And why do you think that is, you know, so much more complicated? Is it because of the heaviness of the stories that, and you know, the fact that they've existed for so long in this form as well?
And also maybe I have developed as a writer too. And maybe I could have tackled something like this maybe as the fledgling who did autobiography for Pepper Seed. And I think maybe as a beginning writer, you start with the stories you know.
And because a lot of your work is steeped in research, or you certainly harness research, you know, for the writers who are here, who are watching and thinking about their own writing, for you, how important is writing in terms of building on what you're trying to say? Research. How important is research in building what you're trying to say?
Well, interestingly enough, I think the last poem I read, An Alternative History of Stones, I had been looking at how stones are used in the Caribbean. Oh, you know, boys go out and they do cook-ups and they use stones to form this. I've been looking at stones used as spaces of worship during slavery, where people would sit on big stones and worship. I've been looking at stones in other references of stones in the diary, in the Bible. You know, so I've been, so I've been looking at Samson, at the David and Goliath. I've been making all these notes, doing this research for this poem to come, to write this poem. And I wanted to explore stones. And then I started thinking maybe stones will be a continuous theme in the book, because you're thinking book length, right? And so then this thing happens with my friend Denise. And all of a sudden, all the research, all that work that I've been doing for a few weeks or around stones to answer this prompt actually became I suppose became the foundation upon which the theme of the poem could rest. So I think that's a good example of research. And that wasn't even research, that was research into finding a poem. I knew I wanted to write about stones. I knew I picked this part of the quote. You know, the quote, it's a beautiful quote. It started, there's a season for everything, a time for this and a time for that. And I thought initially when I approached that quote, this is the season for COVID, that would be the poem. But I got caught on the stones thing and then said, oh, I need to read up on stones. Let's look at where the stones come from. What is the, what language, and started doing all these abstract kind of explorations. And then the poem. So that's a really good example of research and the what you want to write about theme or story, how it enriches it in a way.
Because I guess there is, the poetry that is, a pure emotional response maybe in the moment sometimes, but because of all the research that you had been doing, it was already in your brain and there were these ideas and you were able to then bring them and they were founded on things. And I guess it creates some kind of something new as well from those ideas that you then take with you.
Yes. And also all I knew when I started working on the poem is that I didn't want it to be a literal telling of the story. The story was so horrendous and so brutal and so horrible. I didn't want it to be a narrative. I just knew that what I didn't want. And I knew that I needed to write it. And so in a way, my notebook, I started skimming through my notebook for lines, for phrases. And it's Mimi Kavati talks about the writer discovering through the act of writing. And that's something that happens as well, you know. So in the other one, I had a group where every Christmas we kind of convened and did 12 days of form. And that year we wanted to do 12 days of sonnet. We just wanted to stick with the sonnet, right? So each day you write another sonnet. At that point, I was looking at Samson and thinking about why not a name? Why not a name? And then thought, right, let's see if I can explore this through the sonnet each day and see if I can find the poem through exploring these poems each day. And one of them will be the poem. And then you get to the end and you realize, it's a sequence. Okay, right, let's go back and look at this. What about if if it's a conversation back to the Bible, what about if you're conversing with the Bible, what about if Samson's mother had a chance to speak back to the people who wrote this and to the Bible to say, you didn't give me a name, what are you doing? There's this form that Karen McCarthy Wolf did, it's a coupling. Maybe I can use it here within. What happens if you use a coupling? So I have these asides that I write as well. What happens if I use a coupling within a sonnet? Is that done? What does that do? What is this poem? Is it a conversation? So I have these really weird essay things that I write that nobody sees except my notebook and me thinking, you're mad. This is crazy. Where's the poem? You're meant to be writing a poem. What's this thing? So all of that happens, yeah.
It's exciting to see you, the way that you're joining the dots though, to hit, the way that you sort of jump to the one thing and then to the next, and you can see how in your brain, and it happens, I guess, when you're writing, that moment of like, oh yeah, okay, that's where this is going, but you sort of have to be, I guess, sort of surrender to not knowing initially.
Yeah, and that's really scary because sometimes you're sitting there drumming your fingers. And I said, the ritual of staying at the desk. Sometimes I've sat at the desk for the whole time and just been drumming my fingers and read a book and written out I write out a lot of people's poems that I like to just understand their line lengths and their rhythm. And sometimes the whole writing process was just writing that out. And okay, let's look up stones again. Let's do something with stones. Is this procrastination on stones or is it? And then when you get the poem, you realize it was a don't know phase. It was not a press, but because you stayed and just did action, you were still pushing towards the poem at the point where you would have gotten up and gone and, water the plants or put on a cup of tea. You just stayed,
Yeah, that's the hardest bit, isn't it, from working at home? Mine is doing the washing, which sounds like a really good thing to do, actually, the washing up. But there are times to do the washing up and there are times to work, and I'm using that definitely as a distraction. But I want to just remind everyone that we will be opening up to questions. So if you do have any questions, please do put them in the chat and we'll try and put as many as possible to Malika. But just one more question, really, but a really big one, in the sense that you mentioned that for you it's really important as a writer to be bringing in these fresh perspectives, these new perspectives, particularly in terms of Caribbean voices. And of course, unless someone has literally been sitting under a rock, a big giant stone, for like a month or two, which would not be a good thing, there's been so much conversation now around representation, around racism, with the Black Lives Matter movement being thrust into the spotlight. It's always been there, but more so, and we're all talking about it. And of course, what we're all hoping for is action. And what I want to know, Malika, as a writer in your industry, how you feel about representation, and also, I guess, how you have been responding to what's going on around you at the moment.
So I think I think there's been a really interesting thing of being able to be still and being able to practice stillness in a time of all of this, and also being able to practice absence and coming back and being out of sync with the news is enabling a kind of, I think sometimes as writers or as artists, we sit still and we have to look at everything to absorb it because we're interrogating it. I've not been reacting, I've been interrogating and starting to and I'm now starting, this question comes at a good point because I'm now starting to think I can articulate things. I think as a writer of color, I think in order to write and in order to write and investigate and interrogate our stories against some of the biggest structures that we're up against, that even our stories, the erase of our stories. So I did an interview the other day where I likened our stories to the palette, the literary palette, to a kind of white sheet. And the white sheet feels that it doesn't need any kind of tapestry, it doesn't need any quilting. But actually, in order for the literary canon to be rich, it needs to be a quilt. It needs to have all different colored squares around there, and that will be enriching, because actually then you will get a bigger piece of the story. So when you're looking at something like World War I, you will know that Caribbean and people from Caribbean and Asia and Africa actually fought, and it was really a world war. And you would understand the trauma of someone who fought in that war, watching V-Day and seeing themselves erased from that, and sitting at home with a puppy crying, which Jackie Kay described as one of the people that she interviewed in a nursing home. And the nurse said that each time V-Day, he's really sad because he's not represented. So I think as a writer of color, I've always been doing that work in my work. I've always been aware that the stories and the tapestry needs to be bigger, and that when a publisher says, or a theater director, or a poetry publisher says, this is not, nobody wants to read this stuff, or this is not marketable, or there's not an audience for this, that what they're talking about is the white sheet, and they're not thinking about the tapestry of the quilt. So I think in literature we've got that. When you go to do an MA course, and we have a rich history, especially with the prizes of fascinating, amazing writers winning Booker prizes and stuff like that. But the curriculum is still white male, and it's not only as a person of color, but as a woman as well. You're really looking at that curriculum, and you're thinking about Tilly Olsen in the 60s writing about women going to do writing courses, and how hard it is for them to do writing courses and be given permission, when the writing courses they're just studying male writers. It's saying women cannot write. We're still having that today. So these movements that are forcing people to look at their curriculum, it's not only going to benefit people writers of color, it's going to also benefit women, it's going to benefit the trans community, it's going to benefit so much other people, because it's saying, let your curriculum, let your space be representative, but also understand, if you're teaching post-colonial literature, and you're teaching literature from the Commonwealth, from India and Africa, and the whole of your department is white male, it's problematic. So those are some, we could go on. There's so much things I've thought about, but that's all I'll answer that, because I'm still thinking about it, and I'm still mulling through. And I kind of mull through things in a kind of emblematic way. So I've been thinking about white cotton sheets and quilting, and how does quilting work. I don't sew or anything, but that's the kind of language that I'm coming up with to kind of understand and to articulate what I'm seeing.
Thank you, Malika. And as you were saying, it's really interesting to hear you say that you're going to that place of silence to then interrogate it, and then rather than for you being reactive, you want to really think deeply about what you're saying. And just I'm going to move on to some of the questions now, but it was just something that struck me that Bernadine Evaristo, I think it was last week, tweeted that in a single week 5 Black women topped the charts in the Sunday, Irish and New York Times, and that is a big sign to publishers that you can't really ignore Black writers, and particularly Black female writers, given who's making the box office. So I'm going to move on to some of the questions, Malika, because there are some really nice ones coming in. And I'll start off with Charmaine, who says, because it sort of moves on to this idea of being inspired by writers from the Caribbean diaspora. And she asks, which Caribbean poets inspired you?
Wow, so many. Lorna Goodison, who's now the Jamaican Poet Laureate at the moment. Louise Bennett. I grew up listening to Louise Bennett on the radio, and she was the first Caribbean person and woman writer to really look at dialect and look at the Caribbean language in the geography as legitimate, as something that's spoken that can be kind of literary. Mel Collins, Jacob Ross is a fiction writer. Lovelace, the Trinidadian writer. I could go on. Derek Walcott, of course, you cannot mention this without Linton Kwesi Johnson. There's so many. Rich Shivani, Ramla Chan. There's a whole new generation coming out. Tiffany Unique. So many. Roger Bonet-Agard, Roger Robinson. Just so many. I'll just leave it there. But I could name them for days.
Because I think Catherine as well asked a sort of similar question. Who are the people, writers or otherwise, though, who have inspired you? So outside of writing, are there any particular figures that, maybe really have left a mark on you?
My aunt and my mother. My aunt, when we shut the door of the house in Grenada, in Britain, in Brixton, she was like, right, you're in Grenada. We got all these stories. My grandmother would tell me stories on the back stairs in Guyana when I was growing up in Guyana. And in the night, she would tell us stories about Jamaican Caribbean spirits.
Sorry, Malika, we just lost you for a moment. So maybe you were just saying about the stories that I think was it your grandmother told you?
Yeah. So she told us kind of like ghost stories and old hike stories and all these stories, and we would be like frightened to go into our beds, and she made it come alive. And also, I was an avid reader, I would disappear. People would look for me. I'd be under my bed with a flashlight. I would be under my, when it was time to go to bed, I'd be under my pillow with a flashlight reading. I never thought I would be doing this. One of the great influences on me is Toni Morrison in terms of writing as well, Ntozenge Shange, and musicians, a lot of Black soul singers, like Betty Wright, Millie Jackson, all these singers who sang kind of life and tapestry of life and stuff. So I really like, they were kind of an influence on me as well. And a lot of playwrights as well.
And Malika, as one added question, as that young girl who refused to go to bed and have the spotlight, was there sort of one particular writer at that time when you were really young that you remember just being completely in love with?
Interestingly enough, I was in love with Enid Blyton. And actually in my 20s, I went to all these secondhand shops to try and collect all our books again. The story that really I loved was she had this character called Moonface. Blyton fans out there, Moonface and the magic faraway tree. Just the fact of, I just wanted to be in this I wanted my dad to build me a tree house so I could just pile books up. I just always wanted to have a lot of books in bookcases. And I thought if my dad could just make me a magic tree house where I could just float into it, just have Moonface and my books and some fairies, that would be life. What else do I need? I could run away, and find them. So that was, and I really liked Nancy Drew. In the Caribbean, we were getting a lot of British literature. We didn't have our own literature when I was growing up. So for me, Nancy Drew or George in the Famous Five. For some reason, I was always attracted to like the female characters. They're like, but yeah. So like George in the Famous Five. Is it the Famous Five? The Famous Five, yeah.
I was a bit obsessed with Secret Seven. That was the one that
I was wondering if it was the Famous Five or the Secret Seven. But I was like an avid reader. I was just read and read and read. But those were kind of like and William Blake as a poet when I was growing up. And yeah, Louise Bennett as a poet and Hawkins Douglas as a kind of dramatist, storyteller. But yes, just reading.
Just reading. So I've got a couple more questions here. Sharon asks, what were your experiences in being published? What was that like for you, I guess, with the first time?
I think there was a time from the late 90s right up to where poets weren't being published. They weren't. And Bernardine Evaristo, who's always been a really amazing actress, actually, are you hearing me?
Yeah, we
Am
can
I
hear you, but
frozen?
we just lost your image for a moment. We heard you though. Bernardine Evaristo, you were saying.
Right. So she got a report done that found that less than 1% of Black and Asian poets were being published, but there were all these poets on the horizon. And so I was the beneficiary of the complete works, which was one of the initiatives that came through for us to work with published writers to kind of develop our writing. I had also been on the Afro Style School with Bernardine Evaristo, had started for Black poets when she was working at Spread the Word with Ruth Bothwick. And Kwame Dawes had won the Forward Prize that year and had come to Britain to promote it and did a workshop with us and became kind of like a mentor. And so interestingly enough, all these years he was a mentor with mine. And I kept seeing that my poetry it's very visceral and emotional and very brutally and raw, honest, you know. And British publishers were all about subtlety. So I knew that I didn't have a home in most of the publishers' kind of eyes, you know. And I remember after years bringing my work to Kwame, you always wrote things like your finding voice. And I'd be like, when am I going to find this voice? When is this poem going to be finished? And one day he just said, you know, let's move this aside. My job as mentor, and can I talk to you as my job as editor? I edit poetry for the People Tree Press. I'm the poetry editor, and I think you've got a manuscript now, and I'm really interested. So I know I'd urge you to send it out to everybody, but know that I'm interested. And actually, People Tree, I love People Tree. I read all their books. They publish the most phenomenal Caribbean and diasporic writers around the world. So I wanted to be in a home there. So that's how I kind of got into my publishers and working with my publishers. But I've been kind of performing and writing and working for about 20 years here, you know, before that happened.
And how incredible that, you know, your mentor was sort of watching you and then thinking, yeah, you know, and that you were able to find your home in a place that you clearly felt that you had that sense of belonging and connection. Right.
Yeah.
From the start.
And I'm always glad I worked hard. Anytime he was coming over to Britain, I'd be like, okay, I need to give him about several poems. Work hard. So it was really, you never know where things are going to happen, really. And that's why I think I'm always, my door is open. I'm always open to mentoring and fostering and working with other writers to pass on. Because there was a space where working class women and writers of colors just had no space within those. The publishing establishment was, particular poetry I'm talking about, I can't talk about any other space, was kind of white male. The gatekeepers were white male. Most of the poets winning the prize were white male. And you've seen that environment change. You know, the judges are more diverse. You know, and I started Malika's Poetry Kitchen for that reason, so that writers of color and working class writers and women writers and marginalized writers, whoever they are, can have a space to kind of grow and develop their craft with each other and form communities, because you can't do things as individuals. So
brilliant. Well, I want to get through one more question that I've seen come through, and actually there are two questions and they're sort of around the writing process, so I'll just ask you them both. So Ayushi says, you talked about the don't know phase of writing and finding it difficult to distinguish procrastination from productivity. Do you find that this gets easier the more you become familiar with your writing processes? And Catherine says, is there anything that stops you writing, and if so, how do you approach that?
Okay, I think if you're not reading, you can't write. I say that, you know, all my mentors have told me that. So sometimes when I'm on the desk and I think I'm not writing, so I love this poem by A. Van Jordan, or I love this poem by Sharon Olds, or I love this poem by Liz Berry or Caroline Duffy, and I'm going to write it and transcribe it in my diary. That's a process in writing too. That's me figuring out a line length. That's me sounding out the words to order to write it and understanding and going underneath a poet's practice. When you're thinking about writing is not, the production is an end product of sometimes a long process, right? So what processes for different people are there? Some people might have a prompt and write a prompt. Some people might write lines in diaries, just write lines and then take those lines and start putting them painstakingly together. Some people sit at the desk and they want the production. They're like, I'm sitting at the desk and I want a poem, and I want a good poem. And that's kind of problematic. The writing process is like any artistic process. If you think about an artist, they're sketching, they're doing hundreds of sketches, and then they're looking at those things, and in the formation of the sketches, they're formatting things. The questions and the answers and the delivery comes in the action, and the action could be in the action of reading, or it could be in the action of writing. There are times when the action goes on for a long time, like that stones. We're meant to write a poem a day, and I've been here 2 weeks just gathering information about stones. That is procrastination. Then, the poem comes, and then I go, wow, that was preparation. So you don't know. You still have that insecurity as a writer at the desk where you go, I'm procrastinating. Am I researching for you? Why am I looking up stones? God damn it. Why am I looking up stones? And then the end result then shows you, when you look back, if it's procrastination or not, I think.
Mm-hmm.
If it takes you away from the desk and you've gone out for a walk, and then you ended up at a party, or you ended up at McDonald's or a restaurant, then it's definitely procrastination. But if it's taken from the desk and you go to make a cup of tea, or some writers talk about, like Louis Gluck and other people talk about going for a walk, and on that solitary walk, the question that they have, or Kai Miller talks about, he writes a question down, he gets a sort of problem in poetry, so he goes off and works on prose. And he gets a problem in prose, so he goes off and writes an essay, and then he comes back to the poem, and it's so easy, and he didn't know what the problem was. But he never stopped the action, I think.
Mm. And Malika, the question about, is there anything that stops you writing? And if so, how do you approach that?
I think before this, I would have said, before my mom came over and had a really massive stroke, and before my mom had the stroke, I would have said, no, nothing, absolutely nothing stops you from writing. But I think I've realized now that sometimes grief and life and just craziness happens, and I just couldn't write for about 3 years. I didn't know I wasn't writing. I would do the odd thing. I'd doodle at my book, but when I look back, I was like, this is complete nonsense. And then I heard a writer say that sometimes you have to live. So sometimes I have a feeling as well that I'm benefiting. These poems are so rich because of the rich and overwhelming nature of being faced with a parent's fragility, and being faced with one of the biggest things you face in adulthood. There's no way you can come back and write any different. So it felt like it stopped. But now I'm looking at it, it created a maturity to the work that's quite different to anything I was producing before. But it was definitely a block. It was definitely an emotional, it was like, how can I write? Poems seem trivial. How can I write this when this big thing is happening? So I don't know if that answers your question. It seems like I've gone around, but I think that's where I stopped. And that's where it's helped me as well to be able to talk to my mentees in a different way. Because before I'd say, nothing stops you, come on, let me give you some exercises, do this, do that. But now I can think, what's happening in life? What's happening around for you? Because that might mean something. And sometimes with some writers, it means that they go away and they get coaching, or they get therapy, or they do something to deal with kind of just helping them to deal with that, so they can clear a path back to the writing,
Yeah, it made me think that, ultimately we're not machines, are we? And it's that sort of understanding, I guess, of, like you were saying, that, life happens sometimes, and then, but like you're also saying, how to allow the writer to grow and do what they need to do in order to then get back to the writing when it's the right time.
Yeah, someone put down a book reference here. I don't know if Amy could get it for me, because I took out my notebook to try and write it down. It was something about the laws of marriage, or something about fitness and death. If you could just capture that.
I'll let Amy try and see if she can scroll up to do that. And so I'm conscious that we're almost at 2 o'clock now. So Malika, thank you so much for being part of the Lyrical Lunchtime, and for everyone joining today on this hot Thursday. Although in a way, I think it's quite nice being inside at the moment because it's so hot out there. But just for anyone who would really like to, see more of your work, see you online. I know someone wrote, asked, do you teach courses? Where can they find out more information?
On my so I teach at Manchester Metropolitan University, and I also teach for different organizations and stuff like that. I've got a Twitter handle at Malika Booker, and Instagram at malika.booker, where I put up things if I remember to advertise myself, but also wonderfully people also tag me in them and put them up with my name so that you find out when I'm doing things. And I'm also on Facebook as Malika Booker, and I have a thing on Facebook called the Malika Booker Update Club, where I don't only update about what I'm doing, but I update about what other members of my community are doing, other writers. So those are places that you can find out things about me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Malika. And we're being flooded with messages, including Mel, who's put the information that you requested. So we'll make sure you get that. But I've got Panya saying, thank you, really enjoyed your talk. Nina, amazing. Linda, thank you so much, Malika, for sharing all this today. I mean, there's so much here. Some really, thank you for tapestry and quilting from Zoe, I think that is. And so thank you everyone for joining. And Malika, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Rosemary Antrobus. I love your brother's work.
Shout out there to Raymond Antrobus, brilliant writer. So yeah, thank you so much, and thank you again for joining us. And there are lots more Writing East Midlands events coming up online, so please do watch out for them on Twitter, on Facebook, or on the Writing East Midlands website.
Thank you, Geeta, as well. My God, you're amazing. Thank you for the questions.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. But I'm desperate to wear the incredible carnival hat behind you.
My costume. Oh, and the last thing I wanted to say as well is that you can also see my work on the Forward website, because they would have the poem that I was shortlisted for, The Little Miracles, which interestingly is about my mum, and it's the first poem that I was able to write after I came out of the whole stuff with my mum. So you would see that on the website. Yeah.
Which website is that, Malika?
The Forward art. I think it's the Forward Arts. I'm shortlisted for the Forward Prize, and what they
Google that, it will come up.
The Forward Prize, you find out, because it just went blank. But they put up, for the single poems, they put up the writers and the single poems up online, so you can read that there. And also you'll be reading with a knowledge of, because I spoke about my mom and what happened. So when you read that poem, you'll understand so much more, particularly people who talked about blocking and blockages. That poem will explain so much.
Wonderful, thank you, and look forward to seeing more of your work, Malika, in the next few months. Thank you, Malika. Thank you to everyone, and hopefully see you soon. Lots of applause there for you too. So thank you, and goodbye, everyone. Bye.